Um, Great. Good morning to everyone. Thank you for joining us today. I'm really excited that you're here for a very exciting topic. I'm Ariel Davis. I'm the Chief Product Officer of Azami Global. Azami Global offers solutions to IP professionals looking to collaborate globally, including by providing access to the world's largest network of vetted IP professionals, facilitating relevant actions across different jurisdictions. At Azami, we empower IP professionals by providing them with tools and data that allow them to collaborate more effectively with colleagues overseas. Today, we're discussing a very interesting topic, one that is, I would venture to say, probably discussed within firms and professional gatherings more than any other non-legal topic, and that is strategies for effective collaboration in overseas IP work. How we deal with our work going overseas. How do we, what are our strategies with respect to the overseas work? Note that in the interest of time and streamlining the discussion, today's webinar is going to focus specifically on patent overseas collaboration, but we could just as easily have a session on trademarks, and depending on how this goes, and if the audience likes it and requests it, maybe we will have that session. So here to talk with us today are two incredible IP lawyers, each of whom has a robust practice that includes significant overseas work. Charles Pigeon is a registered patent agent at the Canadian firm BDMP, a commercial firm that has been around since 1905. Aside from his collaboration overseas, Charles's practice focuses on patents, technology transfer and licensing, trade secrets, technology litigation, intellectual property, mergers, acquisitions, and other strategic transactions. Joining us as well is Megan Hymore, a partner at the Cincinnati, Ohio office of Dinsmore, a full-service national law firm. Megan's practice includes counseling corporations at all stages, including patenting of inventions, brand building, and corporate experience. We're so happy to have both of you this morning, and let's get to it. To start, and maybe just to frame the discussion, maybe you can both give us a drop of background about your practices in general, what kinds of clients you're helping specifically with overseas work, or just, again, for the audience, we're talking about a patent that has been applied for in the home country, wherever it is. There's an initial registration, and then it moves overseas, either through the Paris Convention or through a PCT. But if you can both give us a drop of background about what kinds of clients you're helping to file their IP overseas, their patents overseas, and where that work is mostly going, which countries we're talking about, again, so that we can kind of frame the discussion. So, Megan, if it's okay, let's start with you.
Of course. Happy to be here. Thank you for the invitation. Always love to have some of these brainstorming sessions and share best practices. So I appreciate that. So my practice, I actually started out after law school here in the US, and I went straight in-house to the Procter & Gamble company. So I spent a dozen years in-house in the legal department, working in the patent space, and kind of seeing things how a large corporation executes their global IP strategy. And then since then, for the past 5 or so years, I've been working mainly in private practice with venture and startup and emerging companies. And what their goal is to be acquired by a company like Procter & Gamble or a Fortune 100 company. They all want to grow and be the next unicorn, that kind of thing. And they have grand ambitions and aspirations. So it works out very well that the little startup guys, they also need to kind of be thinking big and not, ruining any chances for them to be able to protect their IP rights globally. So what we typically do is start and file in the US, but then it's also a strategic decision of where else to file. And a lot of that is looking into like what companies that they might want to acquire them and making them a very good acquisition target. So that's why we try to work with all those startup companies, is what I'm primarily focused on right now, is not the large P&Gs and big corporations of the world, but the small companies that want to grow into or be acquired by those big companies. And they need to take their IP seriously from the start, and their patent strategy is very important, making sure that people don't take advantage of them. So I would say where the work is mostly going is a lot of times when clients start out and they're with limited budgets that they're thinking that, language can be a barrier. So maybe they start in the US and UK and New Zealand and Australia. Like that's a very simple and easy, small grouping of countries. I'm sorry. But then when they're thinking more broadly, it's kind of like they want to hit every continent and just to, make sure that there's some kind of deterrent or barrier there if they're not in those countries yet, but they're planning to expand. So that's typically what I work with is clients who are using this more, and their international filing strategy is more of like, we're not there yet, but we're planning to go there, versus, someone who's working with corporations and giant companies with large amounts of cash to fund their patent strategies might be filing in a lot of different countries because they're already there or something like that. So that's what's unique to my practice and how we use Azami.
Okay, that sounds great. Charles, why don't you tell us, what your clients are doing, what their strategies are, where they're going, and then that way we can frame the discussion.
All right. So basically, I've been working at Burnett Duckworth Palmer for the past 10 years. Burnett Duckworth Palmer is it's a law firm that's mostly doing corporate work. And since we're based in Calgary, we're heavily into the oil and gas industry, which means that a large portion of the clients are not multinationals. Well, they are, but not the IP aspect of it. The IP aspect at Burnett Duckworth Palmer, it's about 14 years old, so it predates me by a couple of years, but we've been growing substantially by having, as Megan mentioned, small players become middle-sized players. And that's, I would say, through the hard work of the client and a collaborative assistance of the IP department. And so basically, because these companies, they're not multinationals per se, they're all under 250 employees. They have a lot of collaborative agreements in many oil producing regions. We're talking about Brazil, Argentina, the Middle East, obviously, Nigeria, Indonesia, and they also develop a large array of chemical compositions which are used in non-oil and gas applications. And that's where they got us to go and file in Korea, in Japan, China, India. So despite being slightly different than Megan's practice, I think she and I are encountering issues that I think most people in this webinar are encountering, filing patent applications in countries where, I've never visited. I have no clue who I can trust and who I can rely on. And this, I guess, brings to Ariel's point of why are we here, right?
Absolutely. Okay, good. So that's very appreciated. I would like to kind of, aside from the countries that we're going into, so Megan specifically mentioned some of, I would call it even the easier countries or English speaking, a startup might start because of the fact that they want an easier path. So they'll do things in countries that feel like the US or feel as close to the US as possible. In the UK, in Australia, in New Zealand, these startups are probably not going to, Brazil and Argentina and the Middle East and Nigeria, but it's nice that we'll get to talk about both of those maybe. One of the aspects that Megan mentioned, though, Charles, is that her clients, because they're startups, even though they do have this hope to one day be acquired, they're on a budget. And I think Megan said budget a couple of times. So we'll definitely talk about that. But if there are a few different issues with going overseas, so of course there's the budget, but there's also the service, the amount of work, let's say, that you are going to have to do in-house to deal with things. There's the quality of an associate, whether it's with respect to a translation and an initial filing, or for the long term, including the prosecution going forward. What are the central issues that will be affecting your clients? And Megan, I didn't give you a chance to say if the central issue is the budget issue, but let's put that aside for a second. Charles, what are the central issues that are kind of bothering your clients when they and you have to sit down and decide, okay, we have a few different agents in Brazil, Argentina, Nigeria. This one's cheaper, but this one is of a better quality or of a better gives us better service. Where are they leaning towards?
Well, it's different depending on the jurisdiction, but I mentioned Nigeria, you mentioned it again. In many jurisdictions, the cost is not the primary driver. You have to rely on an associate where you know that they know what they're doing. You have access to them, within a short email, overnight response. So that's the primary issue. I mean, if a company files overseas, then the cost becomes secondary because overseas filings are always, to a certain extent, pricier than domestic filing. So there's that factor that comes into play. It's no longer about price only. It's about making sure that the work is done right. So in jurisdictions like we've tried some associates in Indonesia, we've been happy with it. We have not veered off of their collaboration because it's scary to take a chance, and in our business we can't take chances. So once we have a set of associate in the country, I will rarely veer away from them unless let's say in the US, well, there's a multitude of associates there, but like I said, in Indonesia,
we have one right here, Megan.
yeah,
I'm kidding.
yeah. But in Indonesia, we have a really good one. In the Middle East, we have a phenomenal one. So, I mean, the primary concern for a client and for myself is to be able to trust the associate overseas.
I totally get that. So Megan, let me throw that back at you before we get into the process, because I'd like to get into the process. But do you think, listening to Charles, do you think that your clients have the luxury of focusing on the price because they're filing in places like Australia, New Zealand, Canada, whereas if they would go to some of to more exotic places, into Brazil or Argentina or the Middle East, there they might kind of move into Charles's strategy of, we really need the reliability and the trust. How do you think your clients would view, your clients who are very cost conscious would view that?
I think similar to what Charles is saying too, that the cost is an issue, but at some point you realize that the headaches that may come along the way for something maybe more cost effective up front, but in the long run is not cost effective. Those things tend to fizzle out, and it's not on the order of thousands of dollars. Typically it's on the order of hundreds of dollars, US dollars, of difference in cost. So if you're kind of spreading that out over the course of a couple of years of prosecution and working with a firm, oftentimes money is not, and cost is not, the initial driver. I would say for me, the central issues that clients are looking at, budget's definitely number one, but speed. So it's speed, it's turnaround. How fast can we get a quote? How fast can we make a decision to move forward and do something? Because again, startups are moving very fast and want things quickly. So I think it's the ease of getting quotes and having them all very standardized. And it's an easy discussion with a client who may not be very sophisticated in patents. Whereas if you're working with in-house counsel, like when I was at Procter & Gamble and there, I would talk with my foreign agents and I'd be like, don't even bother summarizing the office action. Like I can read it and understand it, so you're operating at a different level versus when you're working with companies like smaller companies. I think that may not have in-house patent counsel. Oftentimes it's all new to them. So I think being able to say, like, here's quotes for 20 different countries. Let's talk through your strategy and where you want to file. So I think for me, so those are some of the reasons. I think it would be budget and speed, and also just consistency of quotes and information, and making it easy to have that geography discussion of where we want to file.
Got it. Okay, so yeah, let's move to the process. But first, I want to tell everyone to feel free to drop questions into the chat. You can click, there's a chat icon up top. Feel free to ask any question to Megan, to Charles. You can ask me, but I probably won't have answers. I'll shoot it right back to Megan and to Charles. But if we move to the process, and here, there's a poll that is active. I don't know what that is, but the poll is active. Megan and Charles, you'll see why this is a question for Megan rather than for you. How often do your clients come to you without a strategy, or they say, I'm new, I'm a startup, I've been around a year, this is my first patent, this is my first group of patents, or even if I have patents before, where should I file? What do I do? Or is that something, we all know that's a business decision, but at the same time, they're coming to you and saying, we've never done this before, or we're very new to this. Charles, you mentioned that your clients, for the most part, the oil and gas companies, have these arrangements or agreements with specific countries. So it seems like if a company has an agreement with Brazil or an Argentina or whatever it is, they know they're already going in there. You can, feel free to tell us if there are these discussions that happen before the PCT deadline or the Paris deadline. But Megan, how does that conversation go? I mean, how do you even start to have that conversation? How much do you have to know about your client's business? Obviously, you have to know about their budget. And then, you can say something as simple as, let's start with just the English-speaking countries, but you can also say something like, oh, your biggest competitor happens to be in, China or whatever it is. How does that conversation go?
Yeah, and where I say, like, sometimes startups are operating at light speed and need to move quickly. Sometimes they are waiting closer to the deadlines to do some of these things. So I think one of the critical pieces is starting to have the discussions early and letting it percolate and letting it, them kind of gather other information from other sources. So what I like to do is very early in the process, hey, your deadline's a year out. Let's think about where you want to file, and just kind of having the conversation with them of where are you hoping to expand? Where are your competitors? Where are manufacturers? Where are other players in the industry that might become competitors? So it's kind of having like a broad strategy discussion of where they want to go and who the players are in the space. And then thinking about, taking budget considerations into account. Obviously, people generally would want to file in as many countries as they can, but I think also realizing that the filing fee is just one piece of it. You have to maintain it and then enforce it. And so a lot of times it becomes a conversation of, well, even if we get a patent granted in one of these countries, how likely are we able to be in a position to enforce that? So it's kind of giving them all of these things to think about. And then hopefully they go away and they talk with their investors, their stakeholders, they're thinking about this as they're figuring out where they want to take the business. And then when we come back and discuss it 6 months later, and then 3 months later, and then 2 months later, and then we're at the time where we're like, okay, we got to decide now and file. But at least they've been thinking about it along the way. So I think that's like the number one most important thing, is getting it in front of these clients early and kind of having that conversation. And what I like to do is use in general terms what other clients are doing. For instance, this client's located in this country, but their manufacturers here and the competitive manufacturers here, and they want to move into this space where it's really growing, to kind of give scenarios of how other companies are handling things. So I think that's very helpful for companies who maybe haven't, they're at the infancy, the very early stages of their international patent portfolio. It's kind of like, how have other companies handled this? And then kind of going from there.
Got it. Okay. So maybe let's move then to the next stage, which is, client says, okay, we've had that discussion, or Charles, in your case, we have these, arrangements. Now they want to file, a client wants to file into, name a country. If it's Australia or New Zealand, maybe it's going to be, it's going to be a larger discussion. But even if they want to file into Brazil, Charles, Brazil, and you have 2 associates in Brazil or 3 associates in Brazil, and you've worked with this client and you wrote the patent, you worked with them, you understood the technology. How do you now decide, okay, I'm sending this to associate A versus associate B? And who else is involved in that process? Meaning, do you do everything through the contacts in your IPMS? Do you pawn it off to a paralegal and say, go send it to whoever sent us a case last? How does that process look?
Well, you mentioned Brazil, so that's a very good point because we have a few associates in that specific country, which is the case for many large countries. And so
I thought so, rather than, you mentioned one person in Indonesia who you like.
Yeah, yeah, but in other jurisdictions, there's multiple filings, like 3, 4, 5 a year. Over time, I try to group the technologies to one associate. So there are 5 or 6 technologies, have one associate take care of 4, and then the other associate take care of 2. So when it comes time, it's not really about the reciprocity. It's not really about 10 versus 5 filings. It's not fair or something of the sort. It's really about playing to the associate's strength for the benefit of the client.
That's good. And it kind of, I don't know if Charles, if you could see the questions on the side, but one of our guests, Nathan, said, Charles, you mentioned that you have a phenomenal associate in the Middle East. What makes a great associate? And I'll take what you just said, which is your answer was you play to the associate's strength, meaning I have 3 associates in Brazil, and here there's a specific filing, and I'm going to send it to the one who plays to their strength. I'm going to combine the follow-up question with Nathan's question, which is what makes a great associate? What does that mean, playing to their strength? Meaning if you have 2 associates who focus on the same technology. Obviously, if they focus on different technologies, so, great, you'll send this one the biotech and this one the mechanical or whatever it is. But you have 2 associates who essentially can both do this work. How would you decide, which associate has the greater strength with respect to a specific filing?
Okay, so by strength, I meant familiarity. So
familiarity with the client,
not with the client, because they are representing the same client, but they have been working on a certain aspect of the client's portfolio. So I'm gonna keep feeding them the similar type applications because some of my clients are chemical companies and they are quite diversified despite the fact that they're still chemical companies. So I just push certain files towards, the first come, right? The associate who's done that specific technology in the past. I'm just going to keep feeding him the same type of technology, and the other associate will have the other type of technology. With respect to the question Nathan raised, a good associate is the one who will reply within 24 hours, 48 hours. A good associate is, based on his track record with your files, your client. A good associate is sticking to a quote. He's telling me it's going to cost you this much. I revert to the client. I'm telling the client it's going to cost you this much. Go ahead.
I didn't add the request for exam. Okay, it's another. Sorry, I apologize. Go ahead. Keep. Yes, we've hit this before.
Okay, so basically, everything that the associate does is on point and on time, and track record is 1 file, 2 file, 25 files. The work is consistent, is accurate, is on budget. I mean, to me, that's a good associate.
Mm-hmm. So let's take the other side of the question, Megan. If Charles is ensuring trust and reliability, and which is essentially what he's describing here, sticking to a quote, quick response. These are things that in some of the countries that you mentioned, they might be taken for granted. I don't know about taken for granted necessarily, but they won't be as difficult to find as in some of the countries that Charles is working in which case, when he finds one, I'm sticking with this guy. You have been working with clients who file into Canada, Australia, UK. New Zealand for many years. You've probably built up a huge database of relationships there. How do you determine which associates reach out to for a specific case? And again, I just want to add the second part, which is, and what is that process like? We didn't get to it with Charles, but do you do it yourself? Do you give it off to a paralegal and just make the decision? Do you not even make the decision? How does that work?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think as you get up the company size scale, again, like if they have in-house counsel or if they're more sophisticated with the patent space, they may become familiar with a particular associate. So some applications from a particular client might make more sense to continue sending them to the same firm for consistency purposes. But again, when I am dealing with clients who are more, maybe it's their first time filing in a particular country and they don't have a relationship established yet. For me, trying to decide, I think it's the same things that Charles said, it depends on the technology and maybe whatever else. So a lot of times if I'm filing trademark things too, and I have a good trademark relationship with a particular firm, it makes sense if I'm sending patent and trademark stuff at the same time. We kind of work there. Other times I'll have like a vitamin or supplement company, and I know that there's a really good FDA expert at a particular firm. So it makes sense to kind of send the patent stuff that direction, because I know that there's other professionals at the firm that we may not be using yet, but we probably will in the future. So for instance, if we need that FDA expert, next year they're looking to expand into New Zealand, or I'm just using that as an example. And we know somebody who knows the law quite well there. That's a consideration for me. But I would say overall, when I don't have those special considerations, to me, it's kind of, and this is truly honest, is I don't like spending time on the administrative things of like, even the decision, this time spent to make a decision of who to send it to or where to file or who I owe something to. I just want to file it. And I just want to streamline that process and hope that it all shakes out in the long run. So that things kind of get spread out and leave some of that to Azami for figuring out like who's next in the pipeline and where things go and who we trust. Sure.
Azami is always happy to help. So that's something we spoke before, just to tell the audience, we spoke beforehand and said that, we're not making this a commercial for Azami. We really want to get into the issues, but yes, we'll take it for granted that Azami does, has great solutions for some of the things that we're talking about. But so tell me who else, when there is an overseas case, who else in the firm is involved? In, again, your case, is it, how often, let's say, do you share associates with other partners, even who might have different practices based, in totally different technologies or different types of clients? How often does a paralegal take it and run with it? How often does the management of the firm say, "Oh, no, you can't use that, that associate. Someone had a bad experience 8 years ago." Or how often are there other factors, not just your own relationships, that are kind of that come into play?
Yeah, I'll answer very quickly and then turn it over to Charles. I'm sure he has some great insight here. I would say I don't have those conversations very often about, oh, we used this firm one time and it wasn't a great experience. I have had people tell me those things about, a particular firm or something. And I am a firm believer in, unless it's a pattern, you can't base something off of one experience. And I tend to not do that either. So I would give them the benefit of the doubt and try again. So I don't think that makes a big difference. And then who is involved in the process on my end? It's myself and my, if there's associates I'm working with, and then my international paralegal who handles all this. And I think that's one of the benefits is once we establish a relationship with like the case manager who's helping us execute all of these international filings, it becomes very easy for the case manager and then my internal international paralegal to, understand how each other operates and works together. And then that can be a very collaborative relationship that's efficient.
Got it. Okay. Charles, are there sometimes outside factors, again, whether it's, billing or, say no, by the way, other partners, firm management, paralegals who are taking an important role in this process and therefore also kind of directing which way these filings are being sent?
Well, my paralegal Alex and I, we make the decisions, but basically, you know, because we're big users of Azami, we get the list of this country, this associate. We check the list. Usually there's no concerns. Sometimes I'd like to try somebody else or specifically request somebody from, let's say, Australia who I've spoken to on the phone and wants to like jumpstart the reciprocity between them and myself. And but otherwise, there's nobody involved in decision making other than myself and my paralegal.
Got it. Okay.
And I just
No,
want
of
to point
course.
out that the big thing is the reliability that of the associates that you guys present to us plays huge in the decision making, because it's always the same names, you know, give or take 2 or 3, depending on the list of countries. And so that tells me that you have faith in them, which further strengthens my faith in them.
Yeah, it's for sure. It's about relationships. You know, you've been working with someone for a long time. I have one last question because Yoel is already telling me we're almost out of time, which I'm shocked at. We have a lot more to talk about. And then there's another question in the chat that we'll get to in a second, and then certainly anything Megan or Charles you have to say. But Megan talked a lot about, or mostly about going into call it English-speaking countries. And in some of the non-English speaking countries, Charles, we talked really about trust and reliability and these things, which makes a lot of sense, which means that we didn't touch on something that's a huge part of the foreign filing process, which is the translations. And I'm just wondering if you have any insights about what makes a quality translation, or is it pretty much a commodity? Meaning if you go to one source, whether it's the firm that's actually filing the patent, or whether it's a translation company, you're going to get something that's pretty similar, or even if it's not similar, it's good enough, versus where we look at it and say, no, this is a good translation because it uses certain words that the examiner in this country wants to see. Now I'm making these things up, but I'm wondering, for you who are filing overseas, when is there something you would want to see in a translation to say this is a quality translation? Again, rather than the process where it's about trust, reliability. Yeah.
It's a bit of a loaded question because once it's translated, I don't know what it says. Right? So no, the translation is part and parcel of the filing. So based on, you know, looking back at the experience of, let's say, translating an office action response that I feed to my associate, the costs are always generally aligned within jurisdictions. So for me, I wouldn't be able to tell you if it's a good or bad translation because, you know, it goes without saying I can't answer that question, but it goes with the convenience of the filing and the documentation and everything rolled into one, that, you know, when you factor in the headaches or the removal of potential headaches, it's a huge part of the business.
Megan, I know that you're doing business in English-speaking countries, but you also mentioned going into China. Meaning, as your clients expand, do you have anything to add to the translation issue, or, you know, a specific reason why you would go to a translation company versus the associate themselves doing it, versus any other options you might have?
I would just say that this translation question kind of is one that to me is similar to like just the typical filing process of actually executing all the documents. Like, you need to sign this, you need to sign that, here's the translation, like all the prerequisites for getting something filed. And what I find is helpful is that using the case manager approach and having consistency with the foreign agents that you're using is that those things it's more anticipated and kind of like upfront. Like, here's all the things that we'll need, instead of it being like, here's what we need. Okay, there's another email the next day. Oh, we need this. Now we need this. And instead of it being incremental in lots of different emails, it seems like it's very much more streamlined and efficient, that it's like, you're going to need the translation by this date. So then therefore we need to back up and get it and request it this date. So it seems to me more of like a logical flow, and that it's kind of planned out a bit more than haphazard might be sometimes. And I don't know if that's just the structure that having like an intermediary like Azami adds to the whole process of, like, maybe there's a bit more accountability, or it just seems a bit more structured than having just 500 clients sending you things all the time. So I find that to be helpful, that it's a bit more organized.
If I can add to Megan's point, you raise a really good point. Instead of having say 3 emails and 3 invoices for one client for one application in one country, the client, eventually you file 15 or 20 countries, you end up with 80 bills, and the client's like, what's going on here? I think a client would rather see a large number up front than the same amount in dollars spread out over 60 or 80 bills. Then there's a question that needs to be asked: what's going on here? I mean,
it doesn't seem like they have it together. It kind of reflects.
It seems very disorganized. So I thank you, Megan, for pointing that out.
That's a good point. Okay, I'm gonna read one more question in the chat, and then maybe we'll wrap up with anything else you have to say. Punita asks, how do we increase visibility for working with overseas IP professionals? Punita, you can clarify if I'm getting it wrong, but I assume you mean, how would a foreign associate, meaning someone not based in the US or Canada, become more visible to someone in the US or Canada to be able to work with them? I'm going to assume that's the question, but for sure clarify if that's not. And I'll throw it to Charles and to Megan. Maybe even something easier for Charles first. You have this person in Indonesia, let's say, one person who you're working with. How did you meet them? How did they get on your radar? Okay. Any of your associates?
That was just happenstance, but it worked out well. To answer Punita's questions, I think if I was in your shoes, and I do that, I reach out to, and I do it for Australian associates because the language. I reach out to them and I say, I work with Azami. I've got a couple of filings here. I mean, I've looked you up on the web, and I'm intrigued, and I'm interested in working with you. So can we work something out? So I think, without making this an advertising for Azami, just the fact that the associate says that I do work with Azami, even if your name never shows up on my list of associates for said country, if you say you work with Azami, then it's up to the other associate to, go and check it out and vet it, and then say, you know what, let's give it a shot.
Mm-hmm. And look, also, to say one more thing to Punita, it's very easy. I'm not sure where you're located, but it's very easy to find out who is filing into your region, which law firms, which companies, which corporations. Ensuring that it's the technology that you focus on, ensuring that these people are that they're filing into your region is something I would say go narrow rather than shoot out an email to everyone you think, because then you're hitting tons and tons of people who aren't necessarily your technology or even filing into your jurisdiction. But if you know that someone is filing the technology that you focus on in your jurisdiction, it's something that you can definitely reach out about. Megan and Charles, is there anything that we didn't talk about? I mean, there's a ton we didn't talk about. Maybe we'll have a part 2 if Yoel lets me. But is there anything that we talked about but that we didn't get to mention? Megan, do you have anything? And then Charles, just before we wrap up.
I would say I am a very super organized person, and I like things to be. I like data. I like to go back and be able to see trends and who I've used, and I like that information to be easily available, not that I have to sift through my email inbox or I don't know, go back a handful of years. So one thing that I really do appreciate is that it's very easy on your dashboard to go in and see, what's coming up, what I've already filed, who I've worked with for those different things, kind of like be able to see snapshots of things. So I do like the fact that there's like a repository for all of my international filings and a way that I can kind of, look at that data and see what trends are, because oftentimes you'll be working with clients like I know we talked about the easier countries or the English speaking countries. So for a US company with like a product who's just first out the door, oftentimes that's easier for them. But it's also looking at, what is my client base doing? Like, what are some of the trends there? It's like, well, maybe they file in those places. And then these other clients, like, I guess, how can I connect those clients who are looking to do the same kinds of things? It's very helpful for that as well. Just kind of taking insights from all that data. So I think it's a great way of keeping things organized and collecting data about where you are actually filing.
That's great. Okay, Charles, any last words? Anything that we missed?
Well, not missed, but I just wanted to point out for if you're in-house counsel for a multinational interested in filing in many countries, it's definitely the easiest way to get around to filing in multiple jurisdictions is to go through a middleman. I'm not going to name names, but go through a middleman and get the information organized as they are capable of doing it. And for an associate or law firm in any other jurisdictions, my list ain't secret. The only thing I can't afford to do is lose my own list of associates. But if you guys are interested, if you want to know, well, I've never filed in Indonesia or Nigeria, who would you recommend? Then send me an email, and for sure I'll give you the name, because it used to be called the network. So as a member of the network, I think we're all one of our responsibilities is to help one another, because
absolutely, yes, there's a community here.
there's no winners by not sharing. So if 100%. You're interested or intrigued or cost conscious or not sure about filing in a country, I probably filed in it. So just ask.
That's right. Yep. The goal is to, make sure that we can collaborate overseas. It's something that's not easy. It's not, when you went to law school or to engineering school or whatever it is, that was not part of the job description. And yet, we find ourselves doing that a lot. Okay. I really want to thank Megan and Charles. Thank you so much for your insights. It's a very specific expertise, and we really appreciate it. We will be sending the recording of the webinar, so feel free to share it. Follow us on LinkedIn for more insights. If you want to reach out to Charles or to Megan, they'll be on our LinkedIn posts as well. Otherwise, you can just Google them, and they're easy to find. And thank you very much. Have a great day, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, Megan. Thanks, Charles.